Well, I lied. I said I wasn't going to be doing any more aquarium-related videos. I'm going to be doing at least one more here. I am going to be transitioning from the aquarium hobby to pond keeping, so I'm going to have a pond in my backyard eventually. But this is my Marineland C220. This has been in service for a little over 7 years now, and I typically have only cleaned it once a year. And in the last 2 years, I have not cleaned it. But I decided I'm going to get rid of this and not using a filter at all. Here's my aquarium and the pothos ivy filtration system. I'm going to talk about that in a second because it sounds kind of contradictory here. But here's my aquarium. It's been in service for several years, in this state anyways. And I've done several other videos with this tank and aquarium keeping. I've done a video on what that is and how to make it. The pothos ivy filtration system here is not a mechanical filtration system at all. This is just biological. Or at least somewhat biological. There's only a little bit of ceramic discs, and I think there's also some pumice stones in there in the bottom. It's not even completely filled at the bottom. It's just a couple in there, just for a little bit of biological filtration. So good bacteria. But this was mainly for sucking out the excess nutrients out of the water column, and it has worked great ever since I installed it. As you can see, there is basically no algae growing on the glass in the tank whatsoever. I never clean this. I don't scrape the glass. I don't even vacuum the gravel. Actually, for the past several years since this tank has been created in its current state anyways, the gravel on the bottom, well, it's not gravel, it's that lava rock stuff. I think it was Eco-Complete it was called. But I have not cleaned this at all. This is just a natural environment in here. I don't do anything to it. I've maybe trimmed out some of the plants every now and then, but other than that, I don't touch it. I have the Malaysian trumpet snails in there that kind of bulldoze through the substrate. They make all the debris fall to the bottom underneath it, and then it basically just acts like a natural environment, even though there's a ton of debris within that, underneath that stone basically, or the gravel if you want to call it that. It doesn't even show on the top, and it's not even harming anything within the tank. This is very, very stable. So that kind of brings me to what this video is about, is seeing what happens to this tank if I don't have a filtration system, or at least not your typical filtration system. So I don't have a canister filter under here anymore. Just open this up for you here. It used to sit right there, and it's completely gone. Now, I also used to have I had a line coming into it, a line going out, which then went into a UV sterilizer tube. I forget the actual name of those. UV sterilizer tube, we'll call it that. It flowed up into that and then back out into the tank. And I only use that on a very, very rare occasion. And really, I haven't used it in probably the past year or two at all. I haven't touched it. And I had a valve where it only flowed through it when I had it on. So I had a bypass valve, and it's been being bypassed. But I have since removed that. I have since, just a week ago, I removed the canister filter. And it had been flowing great. After all these years, it's been working very, very well. I have not had any issues with it. I think over the past 2 or 3 years, the O-ring on that canister filter on the top part, where the top actually seats inside of it, not where the tube's going on the top, that O-ring was starting to get a little bit smashed from age. And intermittently and rarely, it would start to leak over the edge a little bit, mostly if I touched the canister filter. But it would stop once I stopped moving it, it stopped leaking. There was only a few drops that would come out. But I was getting kind of worried that if I let it go too long, it may start a worse leak, and then it would just drain the tank up, at least down to where the inlet is. And it would just drain the tank, and my floor would flood and everything. That's one downside to canister filters. If they're under the tank, if they do leak, it's going to drain the tank down to the level of which you have the intake at, that could be a lot of water. And it happened to me once with a fluval canister filter, which wasn't even that old, and it leaked overnight, and I lost gallons and gallons of water. There was a puddle in the basement, the floor was all wet here, and I decided I had to replace that filter with Marineland filter. I have not had any issues since, except for the O-ring I was talking about, which, I mean, really, it should have been replaced a long time ago. They're not meant to last that long. I think they're actually technically supposed to be replaced every time you clean the filter, or at least every other time. Well, for me, that would be like once a year, once half a year, maybe, if that. So anyways, I have bypassed that canister filter, and this tube here is still the inlet from it. but it goes down to my drain system. So that's basically like a siphon, which has always been there because water changes on this tank are super easy. So basically there is that little white thing up there. That's a nylon 90-degree tubing fitting. And the water from the basement, I have a valve right there. You turn it on, that refills the tank. And then that valve over there next to it, turn that, and then that drains the tank. So my water changes once every other week are super easy to do. No buckets, nothing like that. No mess. It couldn't be any easier really, unless it was an automatic system. So anyways, it's been a week. I have not noticed really any changes to the glass or anything like that. There's no algae forming on the glass. I also have to say I've never really had any algae problems of algae growing on the plants and on everything else. Hair algae, nothing. I've never had anything like that. I have had algae that grows on the glass itself, and some of it can create a pretty hard film, some of it comes off pretty easy. But ever since I put that Pothos IV system up there, which has been quite a while now, I have not had any of those issues, as I've said before. So as you're seeing it right now, this is how it's been after a week of removing that canister filter. So that actually had a lot of flow. And what I'm kind of getting at here is that aquariums, believe it or not, if you're new to the hobby or you're getting into the aquarium hobby, they don't really need a filter. In the wild, it doesn't really work that way. There isn't like a pool pump on, and in wild ponds, it just appears there out of nowhere and just starts filtering the pond. It doesn't work that way. Really what you need is flow, so the water's not stagnant. So up there in the corner, I have a impeller there, and then it just moves the water, kind of moves it this way, and it just kind of circles around this way, kind of like a cyclone. And then that's really, right now, that's really the only source of flow that I have in this tank. And then before, when I had the canister filter, the outlet was on that side, and it kind of flowed this way, so it kind of kept that flow going in that direction. But really, in a tank, in an aquarium or a fish tank, whatever you want to call it, the filter really only does one thing, and that's mechanical filtration to clean out the water column, so that you don't have debris floating around, and it makes the water more clear. However, really, the main function of a filter system of any kind in a fish tank is for bacteria to grow onto a media and to create a biological filtration system where you need flow. But in this tank here, you see there's plenty of surface area of everything. You got plants, so a lot, surface area of the leaves, and you got the wood in there. There's the driftwood. There's rocks. As long as there's flow within the tank, the bacteria is living in the tank, which is doing its own filtration. You don't have to have another external one on top of that. But you do need flow, which is what you would get from a filter, whether it's a canister for a filter or one that's hanging on the back. So in order for the fish tank to be fully functioning too, if this was just a bare tank without plants in it and there was nothing there, you probably would want a filter system for mechanical, biological, and maybe chemical too. To me, though, if you're thinking of the one thing I haven't mentioned yet, which is carbon filters or filtration systems for aquariums, or just carbon in general, you don't need it. That may make the water for a short period of time a little less yellow. It may absorb stuff out of the water column that way, and it might help with odors, but that's temporary also. You have to replace the carbon every so often for it to keep working. But the carbon itself is completely really unnecessary for any aquarium. You don't need it. It doesn't really do any good for the tank. It's not pulling out ammonia or anything like that. All this stuff that's actually harmful to the fish or the inhabitants of the tank, the carbon doesn't do any good. So you need biological, which is just basically surface area for bacteria to grow on. You need flow, and then you need the mechanical filtration system. You don't really necessarily need that. That's kind of more of a preference thing. If this was a bare bottom tank and I had turtles, then yes, you definitely want mechanical filtration. But in my situation, the mechanical filtration doesn't really do any good at all. It's not really helping anything in my case. So really, what I haven't pointed out yet is the flow coming out of there. So I have a pump that's down inside the tank. It pushes water up inside here, up into the reservoir, squirts it out, and there's a drain, and then it holds a water level in there. It flows out of the drain and back into the tank. But you can see There's not a lot of flow there. It's very, very, very minimal. So this doesn't really do much good for circulation within the tank itself, and it really doesn't do any good for flow when I'm talking about biological filtration, because there's not a lot of flow to begin with, and to cycle this entire tank, which I think is 50 gallons or 55 gallons, this would take days for this to actually cycle the entire tank. So really, it's not doing a whole lot for biological, but it is still pulling out nutrients out of the water column and that's really only going to come from fish food and fish waste. So that up there isn't really acting, it's not really a replacement for a canister filter by any means. The flow is extremely low compared to any kind of filter like that. And it's not really doing anything, it's not doing a whole lot for biological filtration, and it's definitely not doing anything for mechanical. So that's the only, if you want to call it, filtration system that this tank actually has right now. So this is kind of how you see it now. This is a week after I removed the canister filter, and we're going to let this go for a while, and I'll come back at undesignated amount of time and update this later. All right, it has been 1 month to the day since I have removed the filter system from this tank, so there is currently no filter system whatsoever at all. You can see underneath the tank there, no canister filter, nothing. Just drain tube and fill tube, and that's pretty much it, and the fish food and some other tools and whatnot. But there's a tank right there. If anything, it probably looks maybe even a little bit better, but really nothing has changed. There's no adverse effects at all. The fish are happy. There are fish in here. I know you can't really see them. They're all hiding, but there's one of my Bolivian rams right down there. And I have a couple other fish kind of hiding through there. Obviously, like I said before, lots of Malaysian trumpet snails. There are also red ram's horn snails, which are, there's one there, there's a few there. There's very few of them in there. They do continuously breed, but they don't breed out of control at all, at least not in my case. There's always very few of them in there, but they've been in there for several years, and they die and they breed and they die and they breed, but they're never out of control. There are lots of trumpet snails in here. They're not on the glass right now. You can see there's one there, there's one there. They mostly live in the substrate, and then when it gets darker, when they come out at night, and they'll be on the glass. But other than that, you really don't see them a lot during the day. They're not really much of a nuisance. They're very helpful. So, as I've said, no filtration system, nothing underneath there at all, just the drain and fill tube. The pothos ivy, if you want to call it a filter system, that's the only filtration I guess I would have. But really, that is no different than just having those plants hanging on the back of the tank just inside of it. That whole setup there is not a filter by any means. It's no different if you just put the plants right in the water and just let them grow on top of the tank and the roots hang in the water. So it would, in that case, it would be pretty much a fully self-contained. This is only external for aesthetics. That's pretty much it. I was planning on having a trellis up on the wall and having it grow along there. This is just for aesthetics. But you could put that pothos ivy directly in the tank and let the roots grow down. If you like that look, that would be up to you. I wouldn't mind it, but I just liked it better having this system up here. So you can see the water is very clear. It might look cloudy in the video, and that's just because of the exposure on this camera. I'll turn it down a little bit so you can see. That's about what it looks like in person. If you look from the side here, you can see the water is very clear. It's really not even yellow. It might look yellow on the camera. That's just the white balancing. But I can see clear through it out to the door, out to the front there, and that's how I would normally be able to tell if the water was yellow. And really, that's no different if I'm looking through this water or if I'm looking around the side of the tank over there. I mean, it might be slightly yellow, but it's barely. You're looking through like 3 or 4 feet of water that way. So, yeah, it's a 5-year-old tank. Since I had this set up with the plants and everything, I think I bought this tank new to replace another tank, and then I set it up with all these plants to start with, and it's been like this for 5 years. And I'll include the pictures of what it's looked like over the years, just basically changing the plants and everything. And this is pretty much all anubias growing in here now. There's a little bit of java fern left. And one thing that's interesting is 5 years ago when I put this anubias in this tank, there was just a couple of plants, and it's spread since then. When I first put it in there, it flowered, and it never flowered since. And look at this. The anubias, let me focus it here, the anubias has flowered It hasn't done that in 5 years, and it did that pretty much. I mean, it wasn't even putting a flower out when I took the filter out. Since I've taken the filter out, it's flowered. And anubias really only flowers when it's happy in its environment. So if there was any adverse conditions happening, any fluctuations and things, it really wouldn't even do that. So that just kind of goes to show, kind of drives home the point that you don't need a filter system. If your tank is set up with lots of stuff inside the tank, plenty of surface area for stuff to grow, and if you have substrate for droppings to collect into, if you got stuff to stir up the substrate, whatever kind of life form you have in there to do that, inhabitants, you basically have a self-contained system. The only thing you need to worry about, as I've said before, is flow. There's a flow head up there that basically just circulates the water within the tank. I could probably do with another one, but this one hasn't hurt just all by itself. As long as you got that, and even a bubbler would be fine. If you have a bubbler that could replace that, you wouldn't need a power head. Or again, you could use a power head, or you could even use a hang on the back filter that has nothing in it, no filter media whatsoever, and just put some pothos ivy in there. That'll suck up the excess nutrients in the water column. Now, as I've said before, if you don't have anything in the tank, if you barely have anything in the tank at all, no decorations, anything like that, and you have a bare bottom, then you need an external filtration system of some type, or even an internal one that has at least mechanical filtration for stuff for the bacteria to grow on and to filter out the debris that's just going to be floating around in the water column and collecting on the bottom. But in my case, the way this is set up, there's no need for a filter whatsoever. And I probably could have done away with the filter a long time ago. I've just been busy. I never really got around to it. I just kind of left it alone. So the only thing I do on a daily basis, I put in a little bit of fish food to feed the fish, and that's it. I don't scrape any algae. Ever since I've put the pothos ivy system in there, all the brown detritus algae that was growing on stuff had went away, and I'll include pictures of that as well. But other than that, I think pretty much this speaks for itself. And if you have any more questions, just leave them in the comments below. I'll answer them. This might be my last aquarium video. Because once the rest of the fish in here die, I'm probably going to put everything in here into a pond that will be outside. Anything that's left living anyways, and I'm not going to have a fish tank anymore. So I'll be getting out of the fish tank or aquarium keeping hobby and having a pond outside. I may do videos on that if that comes to be, but we're talking about sometime probably next year at this time. So thanks for watching this video. Hope that helps anyone who's maybe thinking about getting into the hobby or who has been in the hobby and wants to kind of simplify their aquarium upkeep, I guess. So this here is, at this point, basically maintenance free, other than having to do the water changes once every other week and drain it. I only drain it down to about the inlet there, which is about maybe 1/3 of the volume of the tank. And then I refill it with the valve that's underneath there. If you've skipped ahead in this video, drain valve, fill valve. It takes me about 10 minutes to drain and fill, and then I'm done, and that's all I do. No cleaning, never vacuumed the gravel in 5 years, and at this point I do nothing else. I don't put any kind of plant foods or anything. I don't put any pellets in there for fertilizers. I don't put anything in the tank. I don't treat the tank, nothing. It just is as it is, put fish food in there, and that's all I do. So again, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.